There are people on board.
Just a shadow, Kate.
Enlarge, please. There are people, Alex. I know it. I feel it.
Disney expected the Black Hole to be another Star Wars, so they were very forward-thinking about merchandise to promote the film. They started with a soundtrack and novel, but they also released a ton of kids' novels, pop-up books, sticker books, a comic book adaptation that would actually go beyond the film after the crew of the Palomino survived the Black Hole. The first 2 issues were the movie, and the rest went beyond, but it was canceled in America before continuing adventures could be fully explored. There were lunchboxes, t-shirts, bed sheets. There was a wonderful set of trading cards that had 88 cards and 22 stickers costing 20 cents a pack. There was a board game by Whitman called The Black Hole Voyage of Fear, where you spin for a move and the first person to get to the end of the board wins. Action figures were released and they were awesome. For the time, the figures were cool and articulated.
USS Palomino and all Black Hole action figures each sold separately by Mego.
But they didn't sell well, especially against Star Wars figures that had a sequel coming out in about 6 months. Today these figures are worth a fair bit of money. There was also 12-inch Black Hole figures, if you didn't like the small ones. As for the film's release itself, it came out on December 21st, 1979, and the month of December had a lot of big films to compete with. The biggest threat to the Black Hole was one of my favorite Star Trek films, the 1979 Star Trek motion picture, which made $82.6 million and stayed in the top spots for weeks. On December 14th, 1 week after Star Trek's release, we had 3 comedies. The most successful of these was The Jerk, which would make $73.6 million. 1941 did far less at $31.7, and Neil Simon's Chapter 2 with James Caan would make $30 million. Wednesday, December 19th, 4 movies were released. The first was a British film with Richard Attenborough called The Human Factor, which didn't make much money, landing just $376,000 in America. Roller Boogie was a campy roller skating disco film with Linda Blair and pro skater Jim Bray that made $13.2 million. Peter Sellers Being There fared better with $30.1 million, but the champion of these Wednesday releases was Kramer vs. Kramer, which would make $106.2 million and would go on to be the big Academy Award winner for the year. 2 days later, following these releases, on Friday, December 21st, 5 more movies clogged theaters, giving so many options for moviegoers. Scavenger Hunt had a ton of star cameos, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, but in the end, Richard Benjamin could not lead the film to make much. Chomps is about an inventor and his robotic dog, and it could only fetch $1.8 million. Cuba did better with $5.6 million, thanks to Sean Connery heading the cast of the film. The Black Hole came out strong, but not strong enough to beat the ticket sales of The Electric Horseman, with Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. The film would make $61.8 million after its run, almost double that of The Black Hole. The following week was Christmas week, and George Burns' Going in Style would be released and would get $26.8 million. The main problem with The Black Hole's release was that it came out in a very crowded season. Having 8 movies released in the same week really hurt its theatrical projections. And it was also released too close to Star Trek, which everyone was waiting for. The Black Hole would only nab $35.8 million, which was a success, but a small one, considering the $26 million that was invested into the project. And if you don't know about the behind the scenes or making of this film, check out our Part 1 video. However, the biggest problem for The Black Hole was the critical reception, which was not good.
When we go to a new Disney science fiction movie, we want to see something we haven't seen before, and this is crummy as far as new science fiction is concerned.
Absolutely. In fact, when we get in The Black Hole, it's frankly a lot like 2001.
Many critics and audiences compared the film to Star Wars and treated it like a rip-off. A lot of film goers also maligned the film. Many thought it was boring with a few cool visuals, but nothing more. It was one of those films that just came and went, and at the stores, the merchandise that was released with the film also came and went on clearance. When the movie came out, I was in elementary school in Gießen, Germany, and since I was into science fiction, I had to see the movie. However, none of the kids I knew seemed interested in it. It was more like a passing fancy for most. Even peers of the makers of the movie didn't like it much. For example, Joe Dante stated it was the worst movie ever made. But to a 7-year-old, I thought it was fantastic. I loved Maximilian, and I was interested in the crew of the Palomino and the crew of the Cygnus. I liked Bob and Vincent, but I was clearly in the Maximilian camp all the way. In fact, I looked for the figure of Maximilian so he could strengthen my Empire forces against the rebels during my playtimes. As a 7-year-old, I did love the visual environment, but at the time it was all flash for me. I did not understand the substance of the movie, and the characters did not connect with me. Honestly, at 7 years old, I just tried to figure out how this film could fit into my Star Wars universe. As I aged, this is one of those films that evolved in my mind, and that brings us to my modern perceptions of this film. Now, there are two glaring issues with the black hole as a film, and I'm going to address the first right up front, and that is the science of this movie. I don't know much about black holes, but I do know some things about science, especially stuff like atmosphere in space. This is one of those movies that if you take the science too seriously, it will not work for you. You might reject it or downright hate it. A perfect example is when there are ship breaches on the Cygnus and the crew survives the suction. I completely understand if that breaks the movie for you, but for me, I always saw this as a classic family film in the tradition of films like Fantastic Voyage, Pete's Dragon, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Wizard of Oz. Of course, Dorothy couldn't survive a tornado, but that never broke my love for that movie, and this is the same perception I have towards the black hole. I do not see the black hole as trying to be completely accurate, like Star Trek or Alien. Those films and shows are trying to make a no-nonsense, believable world with total immersion and suspension of disbelief. You can question how well these movies or shows do this, but they are aimed primarily towards adults, and they are trying to achieve scientific plausibility. The black hole was coming from a family studio that never did an adult movie before, so it was all new to them, and they were falling back into the tropes of their classic film style. It's like a live-action cartoon that is charming and yet darker than most family films of that time. So looking at it in that vein, I can tolerate the film's mistakes with science. Regardless of that, I have to be fair and say some of the science problems in this movie take me out of the film often. And yet again, I must say, this film is more about spirituality than it is science, and I will go into that in our third video. In opposition to this negative is a huge positive, which is the film's score. I'll put it out there right now. The score is John Barry at his best. It's bombastic, memorable, and relevant to the mood it sets for the film. It's just a great score. And if I was on a desert island with only 10 scores to choose from for the rest of my life, this score would be one of them. It's a must-own for soundtrack fans. I think the filmmakers knew this because the movie starts, just like Star Trek the Motion Picture I might add, with an overture to set the mood of the adventure and mystery of the world we're about to enter. Now, if you notice, at the start of the film, there is no Disney logo. Director Gary Nelson stated he did not want the Disney logo and wanted this film to stand apart from the normal logo, especially since it was the first PG film for the company. Part of this was because, up to that point, all Disney films were sort of directed for a younger audience, and I didn't want older people, anybody over 18, to stay away from the theater if they thought it was just a typical Disney film. Now, the film novel was released at the same time of the movie, like most novels. and it adds different things that was not in the movie. And we will cover these things like we do with every movie we cover. However, I wanted to note that this novel is a bit different because Alan Dean Foster did not have access to the ending of the movie because it was so secretive. There was no discussions to be had about the ending, so Foster had to create his own end. He did the best he could with the ending, and we will cover it when we get to part 3. However, the novel does something that the film did not, and this brings us to the other issue with the Black Hole film. The novel really helps flesh out the main characters more, and sadly, so did some of the earlier scripts. To start out at the beginning of the movie, the crew of the Palomino suffers from low morale. They have spent 18 months looking for life and has come up short like every other mission to date. They are now heading back to Earth with no major accomplishments. The two crewmen most affected by this is reporter Harry Booth and science officer Alex Durant. In the novel, Harry is described as a reporter with no story to tell, returning home, and due to his age, there's a good chance this mission might be his last. Alex Durant, like Harry, is a scientist with little to report, and it appears the common disappointment of these two has created a friendship between them. Now, a scene that was filmed for the movie that the novel covers was when Lieutenant Charlie Pizer is having dehydrated turkey for Christmas Eve. He is bummed as well, but unlike the others, he is homesick. He doesn't feel the failure of the trip. After Charlie talks about missing home, Vincent would respond that space is the only home he knows. Now, I don't think The Black Hole is a slow movie. It's a mood movie where you soak in the sights, the craftsmanship, the world, and especially the music. I think these character building scenes were very important to the film and would have added another layer to this film that it needed badly, and that is characterization. I'm honestly a bit confused why these scenes were not included in the final product. And now I'm going to keep going with this because there was also a romance scene filmed at the beginning of the film where Kate McRae and Captain Dan Holland were floating around, kissing and having fun, thus establishing that they are a couple very early in the film. Instead of these fundamentally critical scenes creating identities for these characters before they board the Cygnus, it just starts with Vincent finding the anomaly and everyone talking about the Cygnus and the black hole. We are introduced quickly to this crew, and we can't distinguish between them beyond appearance. There is no time to learn who they are. We are basically just thrown into the film with no layers to anyone, which is an obvious editing error in my opinion. What makes it even worse is the book goes on to explain simple things that could have been explained in the film, like the ESP. How can Kate communicate to a robot with ESP? Well, she had a surgery that put a device in her head that allows her to communicate over distances with robots. It's kind of like Wi-Fi, but explained in the film as ESP. A 5-second line in the movie would have made sense to something that was really far-fetched for that time. The surgery also allows Kate to access people as well sometimes. Now, it may seem like I'm coming down hard on this film. I'm not. I have great nostalgia for this film, and I often see it every year while enjoying it. However, the science and character depth in the final product is very lacking, and it would be very dishonest of me to just ignore these things. That is one of the reasons I always study every novelization and every script and or material I can find about a movie when we explore it on this channel. In most movie novels, you will always find extra stuff that gives you a perspective you didn't realize or notice because it was so minuscule. However, after you read a film novel, you can pick up on actors' expressions better than before because most of the stuff in the novel was deleted scenes and it was cut because you can usually verify it in earlier scripts. However, actors inhabit these characters and played those deleted scenes, and they simply just continue showing that in the film. A perfect example is Ripley's nosebleed in Alien. Ash never touched her, and yet her nose is bleeding. Why? Well, in the novel and early scripts, it's clear and obvious. Because there was a filmed airlock scene that was cut for budget reasons, and Ripley was suffering from decompression sickness as a result. And if you want to learn more about this scene, check it out in my Part 2 Alien video. Nevertheless, Ripley's nosebleed is in the movie, and therefore it seems strangely out of place. And you wouldn't get it unless you read the novel or earlier scripts. That is why I will always champion studying such materials if you have passion for a movie. Movie critics who say books and early scripts are not relevant are just not exploring a movie to its fullest potential to understand them, right, wrong, or indifferent. I would never say seeing a movie should require anyone to read a book or script, but if you are really interested and passionate about a movie that you like, I highly suggest checking out said material. It just makes the experience more satisfying, and for our videos, when we say we are going to do a deep dive, we mean it. It's all about depth at this channel. Moving on. Now, Vincent's name is really a mouthful. His name stands for Vital Information Necessary Centralized. The Vincent robot was achieved by various techniques. Sometimes the robot would be moved by wires. Other times it would be on a moving rig that rolled forward. When Vincent goes over the crafts, he honors the original name of the film by saying,
United States, Space Probe 1.
Now, the effect of the hologram was simply a glass that was put between the actors and the camera. The images were then projected onto the glass, and only the camera could see the effect, while the actors would see nothing due to the angle of the glass. Now, the black hole effect was rather ingenious. To achieve its look, they had a 6-foot deep tank lit at the bottom with an impeller. When turned on, the water filling the tank created a swirling effect, and then they would stand on top of the vat with cameras pointing down while they poured different colored lacquers into it, and it created a colorful swirling effect. The tank was dangerous though, as the lights caused the tank to get very hot, and eventually it would explode all over the set. After they gathered the shots, they simply rear projected the footage onto a matte painting. As we approached the Cygnus in 1979, the effects were really amazing for the time. Matte painting and models were a big deal, and it was Peter Ellenshaw, who won an Academy Award for Mary Poppins, and his team is responsible for it. Director Gary Nelson pretty much sums up his contribution. He's a genius, and if I don't give him credit, he'll take credit himself, and it's well deserved. All the model work, the visual effects, the design of the camera, this was all done in-house. We didn't have anybody from the outside come in, like ILM or any of these people, and help. It was all Disney people, and they were magnificent. The Cygnus itself resembles a Gothic cathedral hovering over hell, and the religious symbolism will continue throughout the movie, whether in dialogue references or other scenes. We will cover this topic and all the scenes it appears in our third part video. The design of the ship was an interesting take, as the actual skeleton of the ship is on the outside, and the windows are underneath the skeleton. Director Gary Nelson stated this was done on purpose. If you have to do repairs outside, why obstruct yourself with needless obstacles? I thought that it made more sense to construct the ship's skeleton on the outside so that it could be repaired easily. Now, it's true that Vincent was often referred to as an R2-D2 ripoff in size and C-3PO in voice during 1979 to most fans of Star Wars, and the truth is they wanted kid-friendly robots with Mickey Mouse-like eyes. Definitely the influence of Star Wars was involved with Vincent and Bob, but they work in their own unique ways. To get the robots floating, they would move them on camera while they were on teeter-totter-like contraptions, so it looked like he bobbed up and down while he moved. Now, a thing to note about the Cygnus was that it was supposed to be a generational craft. That is why it is so big, and in truth, the large spaces could be used for expansion of the population. The craft is now obsolete. The Palomino can cover the same mission the Cygnus had with a smaller crew, and it was much faster with newer tech. And another thing to note, the Palomino may look small, but it's not. You can see this in relation to the umbilical cord. Obviously, there is plenty of room for living quarters, kitchens, supplies, medical bays, and so on. But we don't see any of those rooms on the Palomino, so it feels like a small ship. And though this video may also seem small, don't worry. Next week we will finish the movie in our Part 3 coverage. For now, this is the end of Part 2, and we'll see you next week.
Nice work, Vincent.
Out of the frying pan, hopefully not into the fire.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but sharing helps the most. We really appreciate your time.